expressed support for terrorists like Razmia Odeh. Imagine that both Congresspeople had a long history of associations with open anti-Semites who hate Jews. And finally, imagine that both white Republican members of Congress were calling for a complete cutoff of aid to Israel, as well as boycott, divestment, and sanctions from Israel, and demanded entry to Israel. Do you think the story might be the beliefs of the two white Republican congressmen, or would it be how mean Israel is to these people in not allowing them to come? We all know the answer to this. If we were talking about Steve King and Pat Buchanan, as a representative, then this would be the story. The story would be their evil, terrible, horrible, no good, very bad beliefs. However, make these members of Congress females of color who are Muslim, and suddenly the math completely shifts, and we are not allowed to talk about any of this. There is no mainstream media coverage of any of these things. And if there is mainstream media coverage, it's about how audacious these women are, how they are raising issues that haven't been thought of before. Issues like whether Jews drink Christian blood. I mean, that is literally what the group that was sponsoring their trip has put on their website. This is where the Democrats are. They will defend anything that these women do. And they will do so if it means justifying full-on terrorism and anti-Semitism. This became fairly clear yesterday when Rich Lowry of National Review was on CNN with Peter Beinart, representative Hamas, on CNN. So Peter Beinart writes for a bunch of publications, including The New Republic and The Nation. Peter Beinart has always been a representative of the pro-Hamas position in the Israel-Hamas, Israel-Palestinian debate. He has never seen an action by Israel that he finds appropriate. He has always justified, and he justified terrorism yesterday on CNN, on national television, in order to defend Omar and Tlaib. This is how far the left is willing to go to defend these women, specifically because they're trying to, again, grab hold of the passionate base in full knowledge that they are alienating moderates in the process. Here's Beinart being insane.
Palestinians don't have to be saints in order to deserve the basic rights that all of us take for granted, right? Miftah has said things that I disagree with. They made an anti-Semitic statement that they apologized for.
These are strong supporters of the BDS movement. They are not honest brokers. We wouldn't afford a white nationalist organization the leeway that Peter is giving this organization. Oh, they're not saints. This is an anti-Semitic group that supported terrorism, supports blowing up innocent civilians and children. And no matter what you think of the dispute between the Palestinians and Israel, that is an illegitimate tactic that no one should associate with advocates of.
Okay, and this prompted Beinart to actually start justifying terrorism. He loses it, and he starts justifying terrorism on national TV.
He's devoted her life as a nonviolent activist to opposing an oppression which none of us which does not accord with the values that any of us believe in as Americans.
So she doesn't control her own organization and what it publishes?
Rich, why don't you try spending a little bit of time focusing on the fact that almost $4 billion of U.S. aid is used to put children in detention?
You're the one distracting from the issue. I'm asking
No, this is the issue. You're distracting from the issue because National Review, just as National Review defended apartheid, and just as you defended segregation, you now defend Israel's oppression of Palestinian basic rights. It's a tradition for you guys.
Okay, then Beinart went even further, and he suggested that terrorism may be justified by the fact that Israel is oppressive. And this is what Beinart has been saying for years. I've been on CNN talking with Peter Beinart, and I've said openly that this guy represents the Hamas position. He's doing all of that because, and increasingly so are members of the Democratic Party, in order to try and make the case that Omar and Tlaib are not out of bounds. Beinart then tried to defend himself, and he said, "Today I was asked if I support Palestinian suicide bombers. God forbid, a friend was killed by one, but how's there a but at the end of that statement? But Palestinians don't forfeit their rights because some in their midst pursue them in an immoral way. Mandela and Malcolm X endorsed violence, didn't make their oppression okay. So we're now comparing Nelson Mandela to Miftah and Palestinian terrorists? Okay, all of this to defend the evils and the horrible viewpoints and the anti-Semitism of Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. In a second, we'll get to Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. So Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar hold a press conference yesterday. And in this press conference, they make a bunch of anti-Semitic statements. And the Democratic Party, again, backing them to the hilt because this is the game in the Democratic Party. They will defend their radicals under nearly every circumstance without even asking as to whether their viewpoints are radical. Here's Rashida Tlaib comparing Israel to South Africa, despite the fact that Arabs and Muslims in Israel can vote, hold positions in the Knesset, are members of the Israeli Supreme Court, that Arabic is an official language in Israel, despite the fact that Arab Muslims in Israel are treated better than they are anywhere in the Arab Muslim world, Does not matter. Rashida Tlaib ripping on Israel, calling it an apartheid state.
History does have a habit of repeating itself. I learned this week that a former member of Congress, Congressman Charles C. Diggs, Jr., was denied entry into apartheid South Africa in 1972. He was also the representative for the 13th Congressional District in Michigan. I was born and raised in the beautiful Detroit, where many of my African-American teachers taught me about the realities of oppression, injustice, and the need to speak up and take action.
Okay, calling Israel an apartheid state is obviously anti-Semitic because it is not an apartheid state, and it is, of course, singling out Israel in a way that Rashida Tlaib would never single out anybody else. And Ilhan Omar made this perfectly obvious. Right? She actually called for an end to aid to Israel. I can't imagine why Israel didn't let her in. She's literally calling for an end to aid to Israel and a boycott of the state of Israel. I can't imagine why they didn't allow her in to propagandize on behalf of Israel's destruction.
We give Israel more than $3 million in aid every year. This is predicated on their being an important ally in the region and the only democracy in the Middle East. We must be asking, as Israel's ally, the Netanyahu government stop the expansion of settlements on Palestinian land and ensure full rights for Palestinians if we are to give them aid.
Okay, like she wants to give Israel aid and like they're an ally. Okay, let me be frank about this. Benjamin Netanyahu put a unilateral settlement freeze in place 2 years ago, and none of these people cared one iota about this. This is all a lie. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, they want Israel destroyed. And they're obvious about this, and they're so disingenuous about it as well. Again, the idea that she is a secret ally of Israel is insane. You have to be a nutty person to believe this sort of nonsense. And she tried her intersectional appeal. She tried to say, people keep calling me an anti-Semite. I don't know why, even though I just tried to campaign with a group that has pushed the blood libel. Sure, I don't know why people keep calling me an anti-Semite. You know what this is? This is all about Trump trying to separate Muslims from Jews. I would go more with it is you being a radical Jew hater. I got into a little bit of a spat with Ilhan Omar on Twitter yesterday because the folks at Media Matters doing their usual solid work took me out of context on something. I tweeted about it. Ilhan Omar then tweeted that I was both a fool and hateful, to which I tweeted back, well, I must have hypnotized the world using my Benjamins. But in any case, Ilhan Omar tries this intersectional approach where she's not an anti-Semite. It's just the Trump administration trying to separate off the Jews and the Muslims. This is insanity.
We know Donald Trump would love nothing more than to use this issue to pit Muslims and Jewish Americans against each other. The Muslim community and the Jewish community are being othered and made into the boogeyman by this administration. But as we will hear today, people of all different faiths are coming together to speak up against the status quo in the region. I'm grateful for the solidarity shown by
this is the myth that Ilhan Omar and the Democratic Party tell themselves. The myth they tell themselves is that there is such a thing as an intersectional coalition and they're all on each other's side and they all oppose Trump and that's what will hold them together. In the end, that coalition will fall apart. It will break apart on the shoals of its own identity politics. And the fact is this, Ilhan Omar, she don't like the Jews very much. And it is obvious from all of her behavior and everything that she says that this is the case. And then she brings in token Jews from Jewish Voice for Peace, which is a pathetic anti-Israel, anti-Jewish organization. And then she talks about how pro-Jewish. It's insanity. But the idea is that hatred of Trump will hold that coalition together. It will until it doesn't. It will until it doesn't. And it's one of the reasons why it is incumbent on President Trump to actually, as president, try and embolden the decent people still left in the Democratic Party, and there are many of them, to stand up against the hatred inside their own party. It's funny, I hear from Democrats all the time, like, why won't Republicans denounce people inside their own party who say bad things? If you've ever listened to this show, you know that I do it on a regular basis. You know that I've denounced people up to and including President Trump repeatedly for things that they have said. You know that I maxed out to Kevin Feenstra, Steve King's opponent in Iowa, right out of my own pocket. And I've encouraged Kevin Feenstra's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, in large part because I have had Kevin Feenstra on my show, because I think that Steve King needs to be ousted from Congress. People in the Republican Party are doing a much better job of standing up to people inside their own party. Democrats are rallying around Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. They're not even asking the question. Oh, weird that they would be rallying with groups that want the destruction of the state of Israel and openly celebrate terrorism. Very weird, very odd. We mustn't pay attention to it because, after all, the heart and soul, the Schadenfreude, the Zeitgeist, the Zeitgeist of the time suggests that Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib are in the ascendancy. And I don't think it's in the long-term or even medium-term interest of the country for the Democrats to rally around their worst members any more than I think Democrats should root for Republicans to rally around their worst members so that they can
get to a town hall in a little bit. So,
Representative Omar, what's the reaction from your district? Because you feel like you do represent a number of synagogues too.
The reaction in my district has been an overwhelming outcry and condemnation of the particular action that's been taken by the Netanyahu administration and the urging of our president. I mean, people really are appalled in many ways. People feel like when you are a United States citizen, forget the fact that we are members of Congress. When you are the United States citizen, that your president, your ambassadors, your State Department works on your behalf. They defend you and fight for your right to freedom of speech, to freedom of movement, and to have an administration and a president and an ambassador that is not doing that puts fear in many people's hearts. They can't trust if they found themselves abroad or were thinking, someone was refusing them a visa, that their country would fight for them. Rashida earlier talked about Congressman Diggs, who was denied a visa to enter a then apartheid South Africa. The United States government, our ambassador, our State Department, our president fought to make sure that he got that visa, and he did go. And so for us, this isn't, right? Everything is beyond us, and there are a lot of people who currently feel like what is taking place is going to have a larger impact on them.
Specifically, what about the synagogues, though, and the Jewish population? What have you heard?
You've heard from Jewish members of my constituency. We had a really wonderful meeting before I took my trip to get an insight of what kind of questions they wanted me to ask, what they were interested in me learning, and how they wanted a check back in to happen after I'd returned. And we've heard from, almost every single Jewish organization here in my district who've issued statements. Many of the Jewish leaders in my district and in Rashida's as well have been raising their voices. Many of our Jewish colleagues in Congress have reached out and have issued a statement in condemnation. This is not This is not an issue where there are some people who agree